Beatles stuff on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie. I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
Yes, I am all right, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm fine, but I have a slight confession to make in that I'm not doing something today that I did when we were recording our episode on Drive My Car. Dear listener, we record religiously, shall we say, at 1 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, and it just so happens that currently my beloved football team playing live on television. I've watched the first half, and they're winning 2-0 in the quarter-final of the FA Cup. And unlike when we recorded Drive My Car, I am not going to be watching, because they also were playing in the FA Cup then, I'm not going to be watching the second half of the game whilst recording this episode. So if you will already heard the Drive My Car episode by now, if I'm slightly distracted in that, it's because I wasn't giving JG my full attention. However, he did, I don't know if he realised, but I had an iPad set up next to the computer, and I was kind of flicking between. Anyway, I'm not. I haven't. I've even put the phone to one side. I'm not going to do the updates. I'm going to watch the second half once we've finished here. So, dear reader, I'm all yours. And in some respects, lyrically, perhaps there's a theme, isn't there? Because we are doing "You Won't See Me," or as I call it, "I've Just Seen a Face" Part 2. And distraction is perhaps a theme lyrically to this song.
That's a very good attempt to try and do a link in from just not bothering your arse to pay attention during the previous episode. Would you care to name your beloved football team?
Crystal Palace.
There we go. Lovely. Thank you very much. Just for any listeners who are in any doubt.
Yeah, I'm from South London, even if I no longer live in South London. But there you go. Although if I am slightly distracted, it's because the cat is now standing up on its hind legs looking out at whatever birds are flying around outside. So there could be some mayhem to follow once she remembers where the cat flap is. But we'll see. Yeah.
Good. Anyway, this song, what we're talking about nominally.
Well, we did say pre-recording that we didn't have a huge amount to say, so I'm doing some padding now.
Well, you've padded most successfully, I have to say. That's excellent work there. All right, go on. What do you think of this one?
Okay, so I think at this point we need to remind ourselves that this is a decent song on a really good album, and I think this is a song that flickers in places, and it's really, really good. But there's also some I'm not bad stuff, but some perhaps less creative bits, and maybe we'll talk about the ooh la las at some stage, and whether that backing vocals as opposed to harmonies is really the domain of a band like the Beatles. But on the whole, it swings, baby, it swings.
Okay, good. Yeah, I really like this one. It's a song I think I might have slightly underrated in the past, and by the past I mean my entire life prior to about 4 hours ago.
Because that's how much research we do, folks.
That's it, exactly. I was, as I quite often do with these songs from recovering them, I pick up my guitar and give them a strum prior to recording. And I happened to do that this morning with my fella who plays bass. And I had really kind of underappreciated how good the bass line is in this song. It's really, really something. But honestly, it's just a really well-built song. Like, as I often say, it doesn't necessarily take a huge amount of incredibly sophisticated chords to make a good song. That's kind of true here. There's a couple of odd ones which are thrown in, but for the most part, it's just a really well-built song, which isn't just following basic structure. Yeah, you get a couple of verses. There's no real chorus. There's a bit of a middle eight twice, and then we're off again. But it's just really effectively done. It builds effectively. The instrumentation is incredibly well done. And I kind of regret that I haven't paid more attention to it in the past because, yeah, this is a really good song.
I think it's kind of bass and piano that really kind of drive the rhythm on this.
Mm.
I mean, in terms of guitar, I don't know if you were able to pick out how much George was actually doing here. It doesn't feel like it's, I mean, which is ironic considering one of the covers we might touch on later has quite a kicking guitar solo. This feels a little bit like, you could say, all right, George, take a slight breather, will you? You're not necessarily needed on this one.
Yeah, there's not a lot of George going on here. But again, it's another one of those Beatles songs which just everybody is doing precisely what they need to.
Mm.
Nobody is over egging the pudding. Nobody's been dropped to leave a hole in the song. Everything is exactly where it should be in this.
But I think some of the invention comes from the fact that they probably realised that it's not, one of the grander bits of songwriting. So therefore, it's the old thing about, well, what can they do to elevate it? And I genuinely think that both the opening and the closing of the song really seek to elevate it. I know there are some people that have this theory that the quality of the gig that you remember is dependent upon the first couple of songs and the last couple of songs. As long as it's got a really good, powerful, same could be said of an album, I suppose. As long as you've got a really powerful opener and something really powerful to close it, then you go away with a much better view of the concert than you might otherwise have had. Well, I think here, because we've got something a little bit different, as the Beatles have done quite regularly, and also a really interesting way of fading out, I think it makes the song even more memorable than it otherwise would be.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of the instances whereby I don't want to say necessity is the mother of invention, but this was done pretty quick in the studio. There isn't a
Yeah.
lot of time spent on it. I know one of the criticisms of this song is that the timekeeping isn't particularly good in it. It slows down a bit as it goes on, which is attributed to McCartney playing the piano without having Ringo in the background to actually keep a steadier pace. I don't particularly notice that when I'm listening to it, I got to be honest. For a song that was recorded so quickly, I think it really does show how much you can do when you're under pressure, of course, but also it just works. And okay, there aren't a lot of really fancy overdubs on it. There's a couple of bits and pieces, um, but for the most part, everything just sits where it needs to. It was done quickly, but that's all it ever needed.
Yeah, I read that bit about the tempo slowing in. It's MacDonald, isn't it, who raises that? It may well be
Yeah,
mentioned
yeah, it's
elsewhere, of
mentioned in a
course.
few places. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. And it wasn't something that had caught my attention until I read it. And then when I listened to it, a few times over, you can kind of hear what he's talking about. Although I couldn't honestly say it affected my enjoyment of it. I mean, if anything, I was tempted to then sort of go back and critically reappraise and go, oh, well, yes, maybe that's, and just think, well, actually, no, don't do it. Don't do it. You clearly enjoyed the song, and the song is enjoyable for the way that it pops and fizzes. Well, the fact that maybe it doesn't sort of carry that through to the end, well, didn't notice it. Doesn't matter.
Exactly. I mean, I think maybe one of the reasons that people tend to draw attention to it in this song is that this is during a period where a lot of precision is put into that kind of recording. By the time we get to the White Album, sloppiness will be much more common. And by the time we get to Get Back and Let It Be, then we'll have a whole other conversation around this. But at this point, there is a lot of precision. And that kind of precision is partly coming from the band, obviously. It's partly coming from George Martin, but it's also comes from sort of commercial pressures as well. You can't have a sloppy song that's sort of really put out and will get played on commercial radio. And for all the innovations that are going on in music in this time, and for all the inventiveness that exists within sort of the music of the year, there are still technical standards which are adhered to. There are still a lot of those kind of very unspoken rules, but which nevertheless bands adhere to. And that's not just bands with the sort of the technical ability of the Beatles, but anything down to the 1-2 thump of the Trogs, if you want to take something at the other end of the spectrum, which is not a
Well,
criticism of the Trogs, don't get me wrong, but yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that people tend to comment on the slightly off timing on this song, but just because that's not a feature of the Beatles music at this point in their career.
well, okay. you say not a criticism of the Trogs, but there were enough of us who bought a Trogs compilation around the time that they were sort of lauded by REM,
Mm.
and I'm sure there were enough of us who worked out that they've got 3 or 4 songs, and the rest is, not necessarily the greatest. And I'm sure, all right,
That's fair.
maybe they weren't sloppy songs on the radio, but there were plenty of examples maybe then of extremely well played but just poorly written or underwritten songs. So the sloppiness was evident in other ways. Maybe the playing was superb, because let's face it, around 1965, most of it was played by the likes of Jimmy Page as a session musician. So there was a lot of really good playing going on from session musicians rather than bands themselves. But yeah, yeah, I'm sure radio played its fair share of sloppy crap.
Probably.
Yeah, yeah,
Just undermine my own point. But nevertheless, at the very least, in the Beatles' own career, they
yeah,
just weren't sloppy in that
yeah,
manner.
yeah. Until they were, and even then, that was fun because it's the
Sure,
Beatles, and
absolutely.
their sloppy nonsense is better than other people's sharp. Anyway, let's not get onto that. So question then. I've sort of alluded to the fact that I have views about the backing vocals. What do you make of what's going on in the background?
Well, I think it sort of depends on how you approach them. I think one of the reasons, again, that this song kind of gets criticized for its backing vocals is that they're the same as Nowhere Man's. It's ooh la la la. And that's not massively inventive. But obviously, this precedes Nowhere Man on the album. So this kind of comes first. So if anything, it should maybe be the other way around. Maybe Nowhere Man should be criticized for having the same backing vocals as this, but then they were recorded in the other order, I believe. So I don't know. I don't love the ooh la la backing vocals. But the backing vocals that Lennon does after under the I wouldn't mind if I knew what I was missing. No, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. Those are
That works.
phenomenal.
Yeah,
Those are
that works.
really, really great and perfectly pitched. So the
Yeah.
backing vocals aren't one thing. The ooh la las, they are a bit corny. I think the song kind of gets away with them. But I do think this song tends to suffer in comparison to Nowhere Man, and I'm not sure that's a completely fair judgment. But having both songs sequenced next to each other on the album does emphasize that for both songs, that it's not terrifically successful.
I think it's interesting to try something different, and I don't, from memory, think there's an awfully huge number of examples of them doing this, other than maybe on Help, for
Well, and I
example.
think some of the early stuff on like Please Please Me, you get a lot of shanananas and that kind of stuff, which is kind of
Yeah,
on the cover versions. There's a few bits and pieces back there, but on their kind of own material, yeah, I think there's not an awful lot of examples of this for sure.
yeah. So fine that they're trying it, and there are lots of bands who try that sort of thing, and or try it without backing vocals. If they've had them regularly, so that's fine. Yeah, the track listing may be an issue, but I mean it's nothing to get hung about in, if you pardon the expression, because the whole thing does swing. It's a minor irritation,
I,
and somebody that makes it sound a little, kind of, to go back to an earlier, or a theme from earlier episodes, a little monkeys-ish perhaps.
yeah, I think so. I think it's also one of the very few things that indicate how quickly this was recorded. I think maybe if they'd had a bit more time to put into it, they might have come up with something that was a little less obvious. Like the way they were consciously avoiding cliches like diamond rings and that kind of stuff at this point, and they were writing away from those kind of obvious things. This is kind of an obvious thing to do in backing vocals, but there just clearly isn't time to develop anything else, and that speaks to the speed in which this was recorded. But I don't think it's damaging to the song. I think McDonald is really dismissive of it, and I don't think that's really particularly fair. It's fine. It's perfectly fine.
Feels like there's a lot of descending melody lines in this as well,
There
which
is.
is
Yeah. There's a lot of descending sequences in this song.
it's
Yes.
it's, it's really effective, and I think that also adds to the fact that, um, I would put this down as, certainly for this period, one of Paul's more emotional vocals, I actually do get a sense that he is as hurt as the I in the lyrics. It feels like there's someone who's really got something they want to get off their chest, which, considering how nice Paul's voice can be at times, is is an interesting development.
Well, I think one of the things that is clear from knowing sort of anything about McCartney at all is that he's very good at having that dividing line between what he's singing about and what he's necessarily putting into it from a personal point of view. Even when he's singing songs that are clearly about things that have happened to him or about, emotions that he's feeling. And, this is definitely not the first song we've had about Jane Asher. We'll touch on this later, no doubt. But even when he's doing that, he's always had this ability to have a slight emotional distance from the thing that he's singing about. Now, that's not always the case. If you want to take a song, let's say, Maybe I'm Amazed, like, that's a heart and soul, he's throwing everything and then some into it. And it's one of the best performances of his entire career. But even songs like, I'm trying to think of like For No One or something like that clearly came from somewhere. It was clearly something that he's experienced. And I don't mean this as a criticism. I really, really don't. But he puts a little bit of distance, so it doesn't always feel like it's him. It's not a lack of sincerity exactly, but there's just that little bit of emotional distance. Listening to this, he means every single word. Not every word is perfect, but he means every single one of them. And I think it gives the song a real emotional charge. And that's one of the reasons it sits so well on Rubber Soul, because Rubber Soul is quite an emotional album, particularly compared to its predecessors. And I really love when he's putting that heart and soul into it. I think it's a great vocal performance from him.
For No One, of course, is another one of the air quotes Jane Asher songs.
Yes, so, well, that's why I chose that one exactly.
But I wonder why. I wonder why. I wonder why. No, I wonder if that's more because he was conscious of the, shall we say, the importance, the weight of that song, and therefore it required a different delivery. This is obviously a much quicker turnaround on this, and therefore he could put a little more into it. But For No One has a much greater weight in terms of beauty and artistic merit.
Yeah,
I think. So therefore, perhaps there was something a little bit more restrained in order to let the song speak for itself. Whereas here, perhaps there's an understanding that he needs to precipitate how we feel through the emotion of the vocals.
I think timing is a big issue here again, because this song is essentially about responding to, I was going to say, a single incident. It's not a single incident, but it's essentially that I tried to call you, you're not about, and I'm extrapolating something about our relationship from this. But it's essentially one incident or a couple of incidents which have sort of triggered this kind of thing. So it's happened relatively quickly. Whereas For No One is describing something which is a situation that has developed over a period of time. You don't write a song about For No One because you had an argument with your significant other the other night, So it's sort of chronologically stretched, if I can put it that way. Whereas, this is one incident, and so it's written quicker, it's responded quicker, and so it's got that more heartfelt sort of element in it.
Yeah, I think it's worth then turning our attention to the lyrics, having sort of worked our way into that. And I do think there's a combination of real potential. I can sort of see what Lennon spoke about much later in terms of, when Paul put the effort in, he was really capable of writing some very good lyrics. And I love the line that comes quite early on: "We have lost the time that was so hard to find." It just has a real nice feel to it, and that idea that you can lose, you can find time, you can lose time, put the two together. That's nice. But then you also get time after time you refuse to even listen. I wouldn't mind if I knew what I was missing. I think, oh, Paul, come on. I mean, that's not even getting into the whole notion of really, is there any way to talk about a lady? More in terms of listen and missing, and what are we talking? It's not even a sight rhyme. It's a half rhyme, maybe. Oh, it's just a bit kind of ucky. But the whole, if I knew what I was missing, oh, yeah, no, Paul, come on, come on. I mean, that's enough about what I think. I mean, I talked about lyrics enough over the course of this series. What do you think?
I really. It's funny how times age certain things. You wouldn't think your lines engaged would be a line that would would ever become time locked. But do people really have engaged lines anymore? Is that a thing? I don't know, kids these days. Anyway, it's interesting you highlighted that line. We've lost the time that was so hard to find, because that is such a good line. It speaks volumes, especially for two professional people who are, McCartney's on the road, Asher's acting off somewhere. It's, it's such a short line that speaks to so much, and that time after time, it's so clumsy, and kind of patronizing as well. So yeah, there are definitely highs and lows in this one. That third verse as well. The days are few, they're filled with tears, and since I lost you, it feels like years. I'm also, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Like, it's not badly done, but again, it feels like it's straining for the same impact as that first line we were talking about. It doesn't quite manage to get there. Like, I get it. Like, yeah, days seem like years. Okay, that's pretty standard stuff, but it's it's close enough. Again, I think the song gets away with, but I think it is definitely one of those songs that lyrically it's definitely good enough to carry itself through, and sort of the mouthfeel of the song is enough to get away with it. That mouthfeel is not the word I was looking for, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
trying to
how it
avoid the word.
sounds when it comes out of your mouth.
Exactly.
Isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. It gets away with it, and the texture of the song is good enough that it all kind of flows. So I think the song gets away with it, but there are definite lyrical lapses.
Well, if we manage to increase our listenership, we might be able to get mouthfeel into the Oxford English Dictionary in about 5 years. Let's try it. Come on, listener. Let's campaign for this. Yeah, there's a reason why an awful lot of films aren't set in the present day, and that's because mobile phones ruin everything. You just sort of figure that whole thing about the line being engaged wouldn't exist in a world of WhatsApp.
Exactly.
But I do find, yeah. So your line's engaged. Boo boo! How dare you speak to someone other than me, even if it could be one of the many members of your family. But then you refuse to even listen. Well, you're not refusing to listen by being on the phone to someone else. But hey, let's not get involved in consistency when it comes to lyric writing, because that's a road you don't really want to go down. Yeah, but it's interesting how we've got to this point so soon after he's just seen a face that he can't forget.
Yeah, it doesn't take very long, does it? I mean, we
and yeah, of
as is
course.
the way of love in the heart.
But then remember, their relationship goes on until at least 68, and
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
was I was amazed. I didn't know a massive amount about the trip to Rishikesh, but both Cynthia Lennon and Jane Asher were on that trip in 68.
It doesn't feel like it should go on that long, right?
No, no, it feels like a part of the life that they'd left behind by that stage. I mean, the two people that sort of around the Beatles, you'd think are the least Rishikesh people would be Cynthia Lennon and Jane Asher.
Well, exactly. I mean, how do you sort of generally feel about the Asher songs then? Because we sort of sidled up to discussing that as well. So, what do you think of them overall?
Well, I think I rated We Can Work It Out pretty highly.
Yes.
And I do like I've Just Seen a Face, even though it's a bit kind of for no one, I think, who's knocking it out of the park, guys. There's something amazing about that we'll get to. Um, but I think we obviously need to take a pinch of salt when he says, yes, this is definitely about this is definitely about that, because I think songwriters tend to take an emotion and then embellish it. So it may well be that there are aspects of it that aren't 100% genuine, whether or not he did get an engaged tone every time he tried to phone her in, when she was in rep, is beside the point. But I think what's interesting is is how quickly the emotion does change from here's an amazing person to, well, we're having some problems, and if you listen to me, we can work everything out, to watch out what's going on, because if you don't do what I want you to do, you won't see me anymore. And then on to For No One, a love that could have lasted years, with that sense of regret. So there's a lot going on in terms of those emotions. But I also think that I have to have a massive amount of admiration for Jane Asher. And I realise there's some patronising mansplaining going on there. So apologies all round to that. I cannot imagine what it must have been like to listen to those songs and potentially recognize some aspect of your life being played out, and especially being blamed for certain things. Because I mean, it feels like it's a case of him writing some songs that say, "Look, I'm not a controlling man who wants you to drop everything and see things from my point of view. However, I might be." And that's gotta hurt. So bear in mind where we are, to then get through to 1968 is quite interesting. And can you imagine listening to your life being played out in public like this?
I don't even like my life being played out in public in my living room. It's
Yeah.
yeah, no, definitely not. It's such an interesting run of songs, and very kind of revealing in a way that McCartney will come on to avoid. I think he will avoid writing quite so deliberately. Again, there are odd exceptions to that, especially once you leave the Beatles and we get a lot of I Love Linda songs. Yeah, exactly. I really like the Lovely Linda. It's a really sweet little song. It's very charming. Um, Anyway, that's beside the point. But like it certainly, as far as Beatles material goes, he will become more guarded. He will become less open, and there's I don't love every sort of Jane Asher song that he writes, but there's no doubt that it does give him an ability to write about personal relationships with a maturity that simply hasn't existed up until that point. A lot of those kind of earlier songs, "Oh, I love you, baby," and "You're great," and "Oh, we'll be a fabulous couple together," and all that kind of stuff, is all fine, but it's all very kind of, I don't want to say generic, that's too cruel, but it's all sort of standard template stuff, even if you want to take about the third person, "She loves you" or whatever, but nevertheless, the actual content of the lyrics is, oh, somebody says they love you, but you go back and get them, and all this kind of, it's pretty standard template stuff. That's not to be dismissive of the song, absolutely not. They do it better than literally anybody else in history, but this is personal, and it really elevates his ability to write about this material. I'm not going to regret moving on from the Asher songs, because I think at a certain point, that vein is tapped out. I forget what's the expression I'm reaching for here. It's tapped out. It's done. Whatever it is. So that's fine, but I think it gives a really interesting little sequence of songs, and a sort of unintentional sort of emotional arc across a couple of albums. I find it really, really fascinating.
Maybe it might be better not to think of them as Asher songs, but in terms of relationship songs, that what we're getting is a young man in his first really proper serious relationship, and exploring feelings of love, lust, jealousy, frustration, and so on and so forth. I do, when thinking about this, I wanted to start by saying, oh, I feel sorry for Jane. I don't feel sorry for her. I admire the way that she's dealt with it. It's obviously a very public relationship that she went through, that in some respects rather unfortunately continues to define her. And I think at that point it's worth recognizing just how much of a successful career she had in her own right. She was
Absolutely.
well known. I don't know if she was famous, but she was certainly well known before this relationship. She was a child actor. She was in a Quatermass film, for example, and she had a BAFTA nomination for Best Supporting Role in a film called Deep End, of which I have not seen. But she also had um, BAFTA Television Nomination Awards for Best Actress for Voyage Around My Father, 82, and Love Is Old, or Love Is New, also apparently in 82. I need to double check whether actually the awards were in the same, or the nominations were in the same year. So there's, and she, well known for, theatre work, lots of television work. And so this is a person who is successful, who continues to get talked about in relation to the Beatles, and doesn't talk about the Beatles. And just to revisit something from many, many, many episodes ago, there was a Guardian readers Q&A with her that I remember seeing the readers putting their questions below the line, and so many of them were related to the Beatles. And very, very sensibly, when the Q&A was published, I'm not quite sure how it worked, whether the Guardian journalist chose the questions or whether all the questions were given and she selected the ones to answer. But none of them related to the Beatles. And good, good. Yeah, doesn't want to cash in on it. Perhaps doesn't want to talk about it, but also perhaps doesn't want her life to be defined by it. Which is why maybe it is better that we continue to think of it as, McCartney developing his experience of the world. Because if we talk about them as Jane Asher songs, we also then have to talk about them being Paul McCartney cheating type songs as well. And I don't know how much we as a podcast want to get into the tittle tattle of
Not so much on that front, I think,
yeah,
but with songs like this, it's unavoidable. Touching
yeah,
on the subject of it, and yeah, I agree. I've been guilty of underrating Jane Asher in the past as well. Primarily because obviously I'm a massive Beatles fan, and that's the lens I'm used to seeing. A lot of those kind of people who were in the Beatles orbit, and on the one hand, that's understandable, but on the other hand, it's completely unfair. And I'll hold my hand up and admit I've definitely done that in the past as well. But she's a very talented woman in her own right, and she's right not to try and be defined by this point of her career. And I suppose that's also in a broader cultural sense, of course, like anybody who's involved with the Beatles, whether it's in romantic relationships, professional relationships, musical, whatever it is, of course, and the bit about the Beatles is always going to be the thing that you know dominates the conversation. But yeah, absolutely good on her for not falling into the trap, not wanting to exploit it, and just get on with her own career.
background meant that she had those other things to call on. That, I mean, that may well have helped, but you can certainly sort of see why there are some people, perhaps those involved with the Beatles Museum in Liverpool, for example, or even Pete Best, for example, who do play on it
Hmm.
in the nicest possible. It's not a criticism. It is an important part of their current ongoing work, primarily because actually there is money to be made in keeping that legacy going. But then kudos to those people who, for whatever reason, don't have anything to do with it. And in some respects, in the world of the Beatles, you won't see her.
Wonderful. Well, that sounds like an excellent summation, and bringing us very nicely to a close there. That's top notch work. I can't deny. Do you have any other final points you want to make about this song, or?
Just to say that I've got two screens here. The only thing I've got on the other screen are my notes for the episode. Phone stayed over there. I have no idea what the current score is.
I'm very proud of you. Very proud
But
of you indeed. Give me a score, and then you can go see the score.
7.
7. Yeah, I'm gonna go 7.5.
Oh,
Yeah,
I thought
just
you'd go 6.5.
no. I think 7.5. Like I said, like most of my life, I feel I've kind of underappreciated this song, and then revisiting it for this podcast, it really has gone up in my estimation a bit. And as always, that's one of the pleasures of being able to do this is revisit material and get a little bit more out of it. So yeah, I don't think I could possibly go any higher than that, but I think like 7.5 is perfectly fair.
Be interesting to see what else comes into the 7.5 category as we as we go through, and whether we do a re-evaluation at some point.
Indeed. Indeed. Right. Well, let's wrap things up there and leave it for another episode. You can really get a hold of us. You can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on whatever is left as Twitter, which we shouldn't be anymore, but oh well, we still are, at Beatles_ology.
Laziness. It's just pure laziness.
Yeah, come on, get us on Blue Sky. You're Mr. Social Media.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Good work.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks. You heard it here first, folks. We are also on Instagram. You can find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcast you're using so that more people can find the show. Next episode, we're nowhere, man. And as always, we hope you're going to join us for it. But until then, keep listening.